The silk wedding dress felt like a noose tightening around Helena Katherine's ribs as she stood in her father's ranch house in San Pedro, Texas, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon, knowing that tomorrow she would be sold to a man 3 times her age who smelled of whiskey and cruelty. She had 20 hours left as her own person. 20 hours before Wallace Montgomery would claim her as his fourth wife, before her father would collect his blood money, before her life would become a cage of fine china and bruised skin. The year was 1876, and women had fewer choices than the horses in the stable, but Helena had always been the type to buck convention. At 19, she had read more books than most men in San Pedro, could shoot a rifle with deadly accuracy, and had no intention of becoming Mrs. Montgomery. Her fingers trembled as she folded the few possessions she could carry into a worn leather satchel. A change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, the derringer her brother had given her before he died of fever 3 years ago. $60 she had saved from selling her embroidery work in secret. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. The house creaked and settled around her as midnight approached. Her father was drunk downstairs, celebrating his profitable arrangement. Helena had watched him become a stranger after her mother died, watched him drown his grief in whiskey and gambling until debts piled so high that selling his daughter seemed like a reasonable solution. She had begged him to reconsider. She had pleaded, reasoned, and finally screamed. But Wallace Montgomery had offered enough money to clear every debt and then some, and her father's mind was made up. Helena changed into her riding clothes, the sturdy brown skirt and white blouse she wore when she used to be allowed to ride free across the Texas plains. Those days felt like someone else's life now. She braided her long, honey-colored hair and tucked it under a wide-brimmed hat. In the darkness, if she was lucky, she might pass for a young man. The window slid open with barely a whisper. Helena had been oiling the hinges for 3 days, preparing. She tossed her satchel down first, then climbed out, her boots finding purchase on the trellis her mother had planted a lifetime ago. The jasmine that grew there filled the night air with sweetness, a stark contrast to the bitterness flooding Helena's heart. She hit the ground running, staying low and quiet as she made her way to the stable. Her father's horses were valuable, but she could not steal one without confirming every terrible thing he would say about her. Instead, she would run on foot until she reached the main road, then hope to catch a ride on a freight wagon heading north to Austin. It was not much of a plan, but desperation rarely allowed for strategy. The stable door opened with a soft groan. Helena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird. Had someone heard? She waited in the shadows, counting her panicked breaths. 1, 2, 3. Nothing stirred except the horses shifting in their stalls. She was about to move when the sound of hoofbeats made her blood run cold. Someone was riding up to the property at this ungodly hour. Helena pressed herself against the stable wall, praying the darkness would hide her. Through a gap in the wooden boards, she watched a lone rider approach. He sat tall in the saddle, his silhouette dark against the star-scattered sky. The rider dismounted with fluid grace and tied his horse to the fence post near the water trough. Helena's mind raced. She could try to slip away while he was occupied, but the moon was bright enough that he would surely see her. She held her breath, weighing her options, looking for a way out. The voice was low and male, coming from directly behind her. Helena spun, her hand flying to the derringer concealed in her pocket. How had he gotten behind her? She had been watching him by the fence just seconds ago. Her eyes adjusted to see a second man, this one lean and rangy, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes that held something between amusement and understanding. "I will scream," she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. "No, you will not," he said, not unkindly. "Because you are trying to sneak away from something, and screaming would defeat that purpose." He leaned against a support beam, crossing his arms. "I am guessing tomorrow's wedding has something to do with it." Helena's stomach dropped. "How do you know about that? This is San Pedro. Everyone knows everything. Plus, Montgomery has been bragging about his new bride all week at the saloon. Young, pretty, educated." His expression darkened. "Scared." "I am not scared," Helena lied. "Sure you are not." He tilted his head, studying her. "I am Russell Garrett. I work for the Double R Ranch about 15 miles north of here. Came to return a saddle I had repaired in town, and figured I would drop it off tonight rather than make a special trip tomorrow. Looks like good timing." "I do not need help from a stranger," Helena said, though even to her own ears it sounded unconvincing. Russell pushed off from the beam and walked past her to the door, peering out at the main house. "Your father still has a light burning downstairs. You will not make it past the front gate on foot before someone spots you. The Montgomery place is 3 miles east, and he has men patrolling. You think he is going to let his investment run off?" The casual cruelty of that word, investment, made Helena's jaw clench. "Then what do you suggest?" Russell turned back to her, and in the moonlight streaming through the stable slats, she could see his face more clearly. He was young, maybe 25, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days of stubble and eyes that seemed to see too much. There was a kindness there, too, buried under layers of prairie dust and hard living. "My horse is fast and strong. He can carry 2 riders for a good distance." Russell stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I can get you out of San Pedro, take you somewhere Montgomery will not think to look. After that you are on your own, but at least you would have a chance." "Why would you help me? You do not know me." Russell was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I had a sister once, Sarah. She was 18 when my father arranged for her to marry a rancher up north. Rich man, respected in the community. He beat her so badly on their wedding night that she could not walk for a week." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Helena could hear the fury buried beneath. "She died 2 years later, fell down the stairs, or so her husband claimed. I was working a cattle drive when it happened, never got to say goodbye." Helena's anger softened into something else. "I am sorry. Sorry does not bring her back, but maybe helping you evens the scales a bit." Russell moved to the door again, checking the approach. "We need to leave now. Your father just blew out his lamp. He will do his rounds before bed, and that includes checking the stable." Helena's mind spun with possibilities and dangers. She did not know this man. He could be lying about everything. He could be worse than Montgomery. But as the sound of her father's heavy footsteps echoed from the house, she realized she was out of options and out of time. "Where would we go?" she asked. "I know a place in the hill country, small settlement called Fredericksburg, about 80 miles northwest of here. German families, mostly. They keep to themselves, do not ask too many questions. You could find work there, start over. 80 miles, that is days of riding. 3 days if we push hard and the weather holds." Russell extended his hand. "I will not hurt you, you have my word, for whatever that is worth to you." Helena looked at his calloused palm, at the scars on his knuckles that spoke of hard work and harder fights. She thought about tomorrow, about Wallace Montgomery's thin lips and cold eyes, about a lifetime of suffocating in a gilded prison. Then she reached out and clasped Russell's hand. "Let us go," she said. They moved quickly and quietly. Russell untied his horse, a magnificent bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament. "This is Ranger," he whispered, stroking the horse's neck. "He has carried me through stampedes and sandstorms. He will not let us down." Helena had ridden since childhood, but mounting behind a strange man in the dead of night while fleeing her father's property was not something she had ever imagined. Russell swung into the saddle first, then reached down. His hand was warm and strong as it closed around her wrist, pulling her up behind him with surprising ease. "Hold on tight," he said. "We are going to ride hard until we are well clear of town." Helena wrapped her arms around his waist, her satchel pressed between them. She could feel the solid muscle of his back, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. For just a moment, she felt safe. Then Ranger bolted forward, and there was no more time for thought. They thundered past the main house just as a light flickered on upstairs. Helena heard a shout, her father's voice raised in anger and confusion. But Ranger was already stretching into a full gallop, his powerful legs eating up the ground. The night air whipped at Helena's face, tearing her hat free so that her braid came loose and her hair streamed behind her like a banner. Behind them, more shouts erupted. A gunshot cracked through the darkness, but the bullet went wide, disappearing into the night. Russell did not slow down. He leaned forward over Ranger's neck, urging the horse faster. Helena clung to him, her heart in her throat, not daring to look back. They rode for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes before Russell finally eased Ranger to a canter, then a trot. The horse was breathing hard but not laboring. Russell patted his neck affectionately. "Good boy," he murmured. "You always come through." Helena risked a glance behind them. The lights of San Pedro were distant pinpricks now, barely visible in the vast darkness of the Texas plains. Her entire body was trembling, adrenaline and fear and exhilaration mixing into something that made her feel light-headed. "You did it," Russell said, looking over his shoulder at her. "You are free." The words hit her with unexpected force. Free. She had spent so many months feeling trapped that she had almost forgotten what the word meant. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. There would be time for crying later. Now she needed to stay focused. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Do not thank me yet. We have a long road ahead and Montgomery will not give up easily. He will send men after us. Then we should keep moving." Russell shook his head. "Ranger needs rest, and so do we. There is a creek about a mile west. We can water the horse and catch a few hours of sleep before dawn. Once the sun rises, we will be easier to track, but we will also be able to see anyone coming." They rode west, and true to Russell's word, they soon found a small creek burbling through a stand of cottonwood trees. The sound of water was soothing after the pounding of hoofbeats. Russell dismounted and helped Helena down. Her legs were shaky and she nearly stumbled. "Easy," Russell said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "First time running away." "First and hopefully last," Helena said, trying for humor despite her exhaustion. Russell led Ranger to the creek to drink, then unsaddled him and used a blanket to rub him down. Helena watched, impressed by the care he took with the animal. Her father had always treated horses as tools, nothing more. But Russell spoke to Ranger in low, affectionate tones, checking his legs for any sign of strain. "You really love that horse," Helena observed. "Ranger saved my life once during a stampede. Got me clear of 2,000 head of cattle that would have trampled me into dust. I owe him everything." Russell finished his inspection and hobbled Ranger so he could graze. "Plus, he is better company than most people I have met." Helena found herself smiling despite everything. There was something about Russell's dry humor that put her at ease. She settled on a flat rock near the creek and dug into her satchel, pulling out a small package of dried beef and biscuits she had packed. "Are you hungry?" she offered. Russell joined her, accepting half a biscuit with a nod of thanks. They ate in companionable silence, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. Crickets sang their endless song. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The stars above were so thick and bright that Helena felt she could reach up and gather them like wildflowers. "What made you come back to San Pedro tonight?" Helena asked after a while. "You said something about a saddle." "It was mostly an excuse," Russell admitted. "I heard about your wedding at the saloon yesterday. The way Montgomery was talking about you like you were a prize mare he had won at auction. It made me sick. I thought about my sister, about how no one helped her, and I knew I could not let it happen again." Helena studied his profile in the starlight. "So you came looking for me." "I came hoping you would be brave enough to run, and prepared to offer a way out if you were." Russell met her gaze. "I am glad you were." There was something in his eyes, a warmth that made Helena's breath catch. She looked away, suddenly flustered. This man was a stranger who had risked everything to help her. She did not know what to do with that kind of selfless courage. "You should get some sleep," Russell said, breaking the moment. "I will keep watch for a few hours, then wake you. You need rest too." "I am used to going without. Cowboy life is not exactly restful." He pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard and checked it with practiced efficiency. "I will be fine." Helena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She had not slept properly in days, her anxiety about the wedding keeping her awake most nights. Now that the adrenaline was fading, she could barely keep her eyes open. She found a relatively soft patch of grass beneath one of the cottonwoods and lay down, using her satchel as a pillow. The ground was hard and uncomfortable, nothing like her feather bed at home. But home was not home anymore. Home was a prison she had escaped, and this hard ground was freedom. As she drifted toward sleep, she was aware of Russell settling nearby, his back against a tree trunk, rifle across his lap. Guardian and protector. She had not asked for his help, but she was grateful beyond words that he had offered it. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Russell's soft voice murmuring to Ranger, and the gentle sound of the creek flowing past, carrying her old life away into the darkness. Helena woke to the smell of coffee and the pale gray light of pre-dawn. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing the open sky above her or the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. Then memory crashed back. The escape. Russell. The long ride through the night. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. Russell was crouched by a small fire, carefully concealed in a depression so the smoke would disperse. He had a dented tin pot balanced on rocks, steam rising from whatever was inside. "Morning," he said without looking up. "I hope you like your coffee strong enough to strip paint." Helena stood, brushing grass and leaves from her skirt. Everything ached. Her muscles had not been used to riding like that, and her back protested every movement. But she was alive, and she was free, and those two facts made every discomfort worthwhile. "I have never actually drunk coffee," she admitted, moving to warm her hands by the fire. Russell looked up at that, surprise crossing his features. "Never. How did you survive?" "My father did not approve of women drinking coffee. He said it would make us nervous and excitable." "As opposed to calm and docile, I suppose." Russell's tone was dry. He poured some of the dark liquid into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Well, you are making your own decisions now. Try it." Helena took the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. She sipped cautiously and immediately made a face. The coffee was bitter and harsh, nothing like the tea she was accustomed to. Russell laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. "You get used to it. Out here, coffee is fuel more than pleasure." "I can tell," Helena said, but she took another sip anyway. There was something oddly satisfying about the bitterness, about choosing to drink something her father would have forbidden. Russell handed her a piece of hardtack and some jerky. "It is not much, but it will keep us going until we can reach a town and get proper supplies." "It is perfect," Helena said, and meant it. She had eaten elaborate meals on her father's finest china while feeling like she was starving. This simple breakfast, eaten by a dying fire with a cowboy who had saved her life, felt like a feast. They ate quickly, aware that time was their enemy. As the sky lightened from gray to pink to gold, Russell kicked dirt over the fire and saddled Ranger again. Helena rolled her shoulders, trying to prepare her body for another day of hard riding. "How do you feel?" Russell asked, checking the saddle cinch. "Like I was trampled by cattle," Helena admitted, "but I will manage. We will take it easier today." Ranger can maintain a steady pace that will not kill us but will still cover good ground. Russell swung into the saddle, then offered his hand. "Ready?" Helena grasped his hand and let him pull her up. She settled behind him, her arms finding their place around his waist as if they had been riding together for years instead of hours. There was an intimacy to it that both thrilled and scared her. She barely knew this man, yet she was trusting him with her life. They rode northwest as the sun climbed higher, painting the Texas landscape in shades of gold and amber. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with mesquite and sage. In the distance, the first hints of hill country rose against the horizon. Russell kept Ranger to a steady lope, occasionally slowing to a walk to let the horse rest. They passed a few homesteads, but Russell steered them clear, not wanting to be seen or remembered. The fewer people who knew they had passed this way, the better. Around midday, they stopped to water Ranger at a small spring. Helena dismounted stiffly, her legs cramping. She walked in circles, trying to work out the soreness while Russell tended to the horse. "We are making good time," Russell said, studying the sun's position. "If this keeps up, we might make Fredericksburg in 2.5 days instead of 3. "Will Montgomery's men be able to track us?" Helena asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her all morning. "Possibly. But we have a head start, and I have been taking a route that is not the most direct. We will stay off the main roads as much as we can." Russell glanced at her. "You did not leave any kind of note, did you?" Helena shook her head. "Nothing. I just left." "Good. That means they will not know which direction you went. They might assume you headed to Austin or San Antonio, somewhere with enough people to disappear. They will not expect you to go northwest. Unless they ask around and someone saw us leave." "True. But it was dark, and we were moving fast." "I am not too worried about it." Russell's confidence was reassuring. "Try to relax. I know it is hard, but tension will only make the ride worse." They mounted again and continued their journey. As the hours passed, Helena found herself becoming more aware of Russell as a person rather than just her rescuer. The way he sat the saddle with unconscious grace. The careful way he chose their path, always thinking several steps ahead. The gentleness in his hands when he handled Ranger. "How long have you been a cowboy?" she asked, needing to hear his voice to fill the silence with something other than her anxious thoughts. "Since I was 14. My father had a small ranch, but he died when I was 12. My mother did her best to keep it going, but eventually she had to sell. By 14, I was hiring on with bigger outfits, learning the trade." Russell's voice was matter-of-fact, but Helena heard the loss beneath. "I have been working the Double R for 3 years now. It is a good outfit. The owner, Mr. Richardson, is fair. He pays on time and does not work his men to death." "Do you want your own ranch someday?" Russell was quiet for a moment. "I used to. When I was younger, I dreamed about buying back my father's land, building it into something great. But dreams like that take money, and cowboys do not exactly get rich. These days, I am just focused on getting through each season, saving what I can. Maybe someday." There was a wistfulness in his voice that touched something in Helena's heart. "I think you would be a good rancher. You care about things the right way." "What do you mean, you care about ranger?" "About doing what is right, even when it is hard. Those are the qualities that matter." Helena rested her cheek against his back, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat through his shirt. "Not everyone has them." "You do not know me well enough to say that." "Maybe. But I know you risked everything to help a stranger. That says more about your character than a lifetime of acquaintance ever could." Russell did not respond, but Helena felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. They rode on, the landscape gradually changing as they moved into more rugged terrain. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills covered in oak and juniper. It was beautiful country, wild and free, and Helena felt something in her soul expand to meet it. By evening, they had covered impressive ground. Russell found them a sheltered spot in a small canyon where a trickle of water seeped from the rocks. There was enough brush to hide them from casual observation, and the high walls would protect them from the wind. "We will stay here tonight," Russell decided. "It is defensible, and there is water for Ranger." They established a routine without discussion. Russell cared for the horse while Helena gathered deadwood for a fire. Russell got the fire going while Helena unpacked what little food they had. It felt oddly domestic, like they had been traveling together for years instead of a single day. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, they sat by the fire and shared a sparse meal. Helena was ravenous, her body demanding fuel after the day's exertions. The jerky and hardtack tasted better than any fancy meal she had eaten at her father's table. "Tell me about yourself," Russell said after a while. "All I know is that you were about to marry Wallace Montgomery and you were smart enough to run. What else should I know about Helena Katherine?" It was strange hearing her full name in his mouth. Most people called her Miss Katherine or nothing at all. "There is not much to tell. I am 19. My mother died when I was 16. I like to read, though my father disapproved. I can shoot, ride, and sew, which are about the only skills deemed appropriate for a woman in San Pedro." She paused, staring into the flames. "I wanted to be a teacher once. I used to help at the schoolhouse before my father forbade it. He said education was wasted on women." "He sounds like a real prize," Russell said dryly. Helena laughed, a sound that surprised her. When was the last time she had laughed? "He was not always like that. Before my mother died, he was kinder. Grief changed him, and then the drinking finished the job. By the time he arranged my marriage to Montgomery, I barely recognized him anymore. I am sorry. Losing a parent while they are still alive is its own kind of hell." "Yes," Helena agreed softly. "It is." They were quiet for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night. Ranger dozed nearby, one hip cocked, completely at ease. The trust the horse had in Russell was absolute, and Helena found herself beginning to share it. "What will you do in Fredericksburg?" Russell asked. "Do you have a plan?" "Fine work, I suppose. I can sew well. Maybe there is a seamstress who needs help, or perhaps the schoolhouse needs a teacher." Helena pulled her mother's locket from beneath her blouse, running her thumb over the engraved surface. "I will figure something out. I have to." "You will," Russell said with certainty. "You are brave and smart. You will land on your feet." "I hope so. The alternative is not very appealing." Russell poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "When we get to Fredericksburg, I will help you get settled. Make sure you find somewhere safe to stay. Introduce you to some folks I know there. After that, I will need to head back to the Double R. Mr. Richardson is expecting me, and I have been gone long enough already." The thought of Russell leaving, of facing this new life alone, sent a spike of panic through Helena's chest. She tamped it down firmly. She could not become dependent on him. He had already done more than she had any right to expect. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice steady, "for everything." "Stop thanking me," Russell said, but there was no heat in it. "You would have found a way out with or without me. You are not the type to give up." "Maybe, but it would have been much harder and much more dangerous." Helena met his eyes across the fire. "I will not forget what you did for me." Ever? Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that went beyond gratitude. Helena felt it in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Russell looked away first, clearing his throat. "You should sleep," he said. "I will take first watch again." "Let me take a shift this time. You need rest too." Russell considered this, then nodded. "All right. Get a few hours, then wake me. If you see or hear anything unusual, do not hesitate. Wake me immediately." Helena agreed and settled on her bedroll, but sleep was elusive. She was acutely aware of Russell sitting a few yards away, his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness. She was aware of the sounds of the night, the calls of owls and the rustle of small creatures in the brush. And she was aware of the future stretching ahead of her, unknown and terrifying and full of possibility. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into a restless sleep filled with dreams of pursuit and freedom tangled together. The second day of riding was harder than the first. Helena's muscles had stiffened overnight, and every movement was agony. But she gritted her teeth and endured, refusing to complain. Russell seemed to sense her discomfort because he kept Ranger to an even easier pace, stopping more frequently to stretch and walk around. The landscape continued to change as they traveled northwest. The hills grew more pronounced, covered in thick stands of oak and cedar. Creeks became more frequent, their clear water a welcome sight. They saw more wildlife too, deer bounding through the trees and wild turkeys scattering at their approach. Late in the afternoon, they encountered their first real problem. They had just crested a hill when Russell suddenly pulled Ranger to a stop, his body going tense. "What is it?" Helena whispered. "Riders," Russell said quietly. "3 of them, maybe half a mile south. They are moving fast and purposefully." Helena's blood turned to ice. Montgomery's men could also be ranchers or drifters, but I am not taking chances. Russell turned Ranger west, guiding the horse into a thick stand of cedar. "We are going to lay low and let them pass. Stay quiet." They dismounted and Russell held Ranger's head, murmuring soothing words to keep the horse calm. Helena crouched behind a large boulder, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it could be heard for miles. Through gaps in the cedar branches, she could see the riders approaching. They were rough-looking men, the kind who made their living through intimidation and violence. All 3 were armed with rifles and pistols. They rode with the confidence of hunters on a trail. "You see any tracks?" one of them called out. "Nothing clear. Ground is too rocky through here," another responded. "But Montgomery said they were heading northwest." "There are only so many routes through the hill country." Helena's worst fears were confirmed. These were Montgomery's men, and they were closer than she had hoped. She looked at Russell, her eyes wide with fear. He put a finger to his lips, his expression calm but alert. The riders passed within 100 yards of their hiding spot. It felt like an eternity, watching them scan the landscape, praying they would not spot Ranger's tracks or catch some hint of their presence. Helena held her breath until her lungs burned. Finally, mercifully, the riders continued north and disappeared over the next hill. Russell waited a full 10 minutes before he moved, still cautious. "They are ahead of us now," he said quietly. "That is both good and bad. Good because they are not on our tail. Bad because we have to be even more careful about our route." "What do we do?" "Change direction. Go more west for a while, then circle back north. It will add time to our journey, but it is better than riding straight into them. Russell checked the sun's position, calculating. We might be able to still make Fredericksburg, but it will be close. They mounted again, and this time there was no conversation. Both of them were too focused on listening for sounds of pursuit, of watching the landscape for any sign of the hunters who sought them. The easy camaraderie of the morning was replaced by tension, so thick Helena could taste it. They rode until well after dark, longer than was safe, but Russell wanted to put as much distance as possible between them and Montgomery's men. When they finally stopped, it was in a narrow ravine where they did not dare light a fire. They ate cold food in the darkness, speaking only in whispers. Helena was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open, but fear kept her alert. Russell seemed carved from stone, his focus absolute. "Sleep," he told her. "I will keep watch all night. You cannot do that. You will collapse." "I have gone longer without sleep. I will be fine." His tone left no room for argument. Helena wanted to protest, but she recognized the futility. Instead, she curled up on her bedroll and tried to rest. But every sound made her flinch, every rustle in the brush a potential threat. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to find pale dawn light filtering into the ravine, and Russell still sitting exactly where he had been, rifle across his lap, eyes bloodshot but watchful. "You did not sleep at all," Helena said, sitting up. "I told you I would not." Russell stood stiffly, rolling his shoulders. "We need to move. I want to make up the time we lost yesterday." They skipped breakfast, eating jerky in the saddle as Ranger carried them west and then north again. Russell's route took them through rougher terrain where tracking would be difficult. They forded streams, crossed rocky ground that would not hold prints, and generally did everything possible to obscure their trail. By midday, Russell's exhaustion was beginning to show. His eyes were red-rimmed and he swayed occasionally in the saddle. Helena was terrified he would fall asleep and tumble from Ranger's back. "We need to stop," she said firmly. "Just for an hour. You cannot keep going like this." "We are too close to stop now," Russell argued, but his words were slightly slurred. "Russell, if you collapse, we are both in danger. Please, 1 hour." Something in her voice must have convinced him because he nodded reluctantly. They found a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging cliff and dismounted. Russell sat with his back against the rock, and Helena was alarmed to see his eyes closing almost immediately. She kept watch while he slept, rifle in her hands, though she prayed she would not need to use it. She had shot targets with her brother, but she had never aimed at a person. The weight of the weapon was both comforting and terrifying. Russell slept for exactly an hour, then jerked awake as if some internal clock had gone off. "I am sorry," he said, rubbing his face. "I did not mean to burden you with guard duty." "You are not a burden," Helena said quietly. "You are the only reason I am free. Let me help carry the weight." Russell looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he nodded and stood, offering his hand to help her up. When she took it, he did not let go immediately, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "I am learning," Helena replied, and she realized it was true. 2 days ago, she had been a terrified girl fleeing in the night. Now she was something more, something forged by necessity and choice. They rode on, and as evening approached, the landscape began to change yet again. The hills became more wooded, and in the distance, Helena could see cultivated fields and the first signs of settlement. "That is Fredericksburg," Russell said, pointing. "We made it." The relief that flooded through Helena was so intense it made her dizzy. "We are safe, safer. Montgomery's reach does not extend this far, and the folks here do not have much use for outside law. You can start fresh here." Russell guided Ranger toward the settlement. "Let us find you a place to stay." Fredericksburg was unlike San Pedro in almost every way. The buildings reflected the German heritage of its settlers, neat and orderly with flower boxes in the windows despite the harsh Texas climate. The people they passed eyed them with curiosity, but not hostility. Russell rode directly to a small boarding house run by a woman he knew. Mrs. Schmidt was a formidable German widow with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She took one look at Helena's disheveled state and Russell's exhausted face and ushered them inside without questions. "You will stay here tonight," she announced in heavily accented English. "Both of you. In the morning, we will talk about what comes next." Helena wanted to protest that she could not pay for a room, but Mrs. Schmidt waved her concerns away. "Russell has done me favors in the past. This is how we do things here. We help each other." She showed them to simple but clean rooms, promised hot food within the hour, and left them to freshen up. Helena stood in her room, staring at the real bed with its clean linens, and felt tears pricking her eyes. She was safe. She was free. And it was all because of the cowboy who had offered his horse and said, "Ride with me." Dinner was hearty German fare, thick stew with fresh bread and vegetables. Helena ate until she thought she might burst, her body desperate for real food after days of jerky and hardtack. Russell ate with equal enthusiasm, and Mrs. Schmidt watched them both with knowing eyes. After dinner, Mrs. Schmidt took Helena aside. "That young man, he is good," she said simply. "Whatever you are running from, you are lucky he found you." "I know," Helena said softly. "And you are good too, I can see it. So you will stay here until you find your feet. I need help with the boarding house. The work is hard but honest, and I pay fair wages. In time, if you want something else, we will find it. But for now, you have a place." Helena wanted to hug the older woman but settled for a heartfelt thank you. The kindness of strangers was overwhelming after so much fear. She found Russell on the porch, sitting on the steps and staring at the stars. Ranger was stabled nearby, finally resting after his heroic efforts. Helena sat down beside Russell, their shoulders almost touching. "I leave in the morning," Russell said without preamble. "I have already been gone too long. Mr. Richardson will be wondering what happened to me. I understand." Helena tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Mrs. Schmidt will look after you. She is tough but fair. You will be safe here, I know." They sat in silence for a while, neither wanting to break the spell of this last evening together. Helena was acutely aware of how much her life had changed in just 3 days. She had gone from prisoner to fugitive to free woman. And through it all, Russell had been her constant, her protector, her salvation. "I do not know how to say goodbye," Helena admitted finally. "What do you say to someone who saved your life?" "You do not say anything," Russell said, turning to look at her. In the lamplight spilling from the house, his eyes were warm and sad. "You just live the life you fought for. That is all the thanks I need." "Will I see you again?" Russell was quiet for a long moment. "The Double R is about 40 miles from here. I come through Fredericksburg sometimes for supplies, so maybe, if you want." "I want," Helena said, and she reached out to take his hand. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong and steady. "Very much." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Helena felt something that might have been hope blooming in her chest. The next morning came too quickly. Helena woke to the sound of Russell moving around downstairs, preparing to leave. She dressed hurriedly and came down to find him checking Ranger's tack while Mrs. Schmidt packed food for his journey. "You take care," Mrs. Schmidt was saying, "and you come back soon. There is always a bed here for you." "Thank you, madam." Russell finished with the saddle and turned to find Helena standing in the doorway. "I was hoping to say goodbye." They walked a little distance from the house, seeking a moment of privacy. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of day that promised heat later but was pleasant now. "I wish you did not have to go," Helena said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I have responsibilities, a job, but I will come back, Helena, I promise you that." Russell reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather light. "You will be fine here. You are strong enough to build a new life. Because you gave me the chance." Helena looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything for a stranger. "Russell, I do not know if I believe in fate or destiny, but I believe in good people, and you are the best person I have ever met." Russell's expression softened. "You barely know me. I know you better than I knew people I lived with for years. When everything is stripped away, when it is just survival and choice, that is when you see who someone really is. And I see you, Russell Garrett." For a moment, Helena thought he might kiss her. She could see the desire in his eyes, the way his gaze dropped to her lips. But then he stepped back, his cowboy honor reasserting itself. "I will come back," he said again. "In a few weeks, when I can get time away, we can talk then, figure out what this is between us." "I will be here," Helena promised. Russell mounted Ranger, settling into the saddle with the ease of long practice. He looked down at Helena, memorizing her face, then turned the horse toward the road. "Russell," Helena called out, and he paused. "Thank you for saying ride with me." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Thank you for having the courage to take the chance." Then he was riding away, Ranger's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Helena stood watching until he disappeared from sight, her hand pressed to her heart, feeling the ache of goodbye mixed with the sweetness of promise. The weeks that followed were a revelation for Helena. She threw herself into work at the boarding house, learning from Mrs. Schmidt's efficient routines. She cleaned rooms, helped with cooking, and managed the accounts, with her education proving useful. The work was hard and left her exhausted each night, but it was honest work, chosen freely, and that made all the difference. She learned that Fredericksburg was indeed different from San Pedro. The German settlers valued hard work and privacy in equal measure. They did not pry into her past, accepting Mrs. Schmidt's word that Helena was a good girl who needed a fresh start. In time, she made friends with some of the other young women in town, though she was careful about what she shared. She also discovered that freedom had its own challenges. Making her own decisions meant living with the consequences. Managing her own money required careful budgeting. Navigating relationships without her father's interference meant learning to trust her own judgment. But these were good problems, the kind that came with agency and choice. Through it all, Helena thought about Russell constantly. She replayed their conversations in her mind, remembered the steady warmth of his presence, the safety she felt in his arms during those long rides. She wondered if he thought about her too, or if she was just another good deed on his conscience. 4 weeks after their arrival in Fredericksburg, Helena was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard a familiar nicker. She turned to see Russell riding up on Ranger, both looking dusty and travel-worn but healthy. Her heart leaped into her throat. "You came back," she breathed. Russell dismounted, and there was something different in his eyes, a certainty that had not been there before. "I told you I would. I keep my promises." Mrs. Schmidt materialized from the house, all smiles. "Russell Garrett, you are always welcome. Come in, I will feed you." But Russell did not move toward the house. His eyes were fixed on Helena. "Can we talk first?" They walked to the small garden behind the boarding house, out of sight of the windows, though Helena suspected Mrs. Schmidt was watching anyway. Russell turned to face her, and Helena could see the nervousness beneath his calm exterior. "I have been thinking," Russell started, then paused, running a hand through his hair. "For 4 weeks I have thought about nothing but you, about your courage, your strength, the way you laugh. About how right it felt to have you riding with me, depending on me, trusting me." Helena's breath caught. "Russell, let me finish," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am just a cowboy. I do not have much to offer. No ranch, no fortune, but I have a good job and I am saving money. In a few years, I might have enough to buy some land, start something of my own. And I know it is fast. I know we barely know each other, but Helena, I cannot stop thinking about a future with you in it." "What are you saying?" Helena whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since that first night in the stable, when you looked at me with those fierce eyes and said you were not scared." Russell stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I know you need time to build your own life, to figure out who you are outside of your father's control. I am not asking you to make any promises now, but I am asking if I can court you properly. Come visit when I can, write letters, see where this goes." Tears were streaming down Helena's face, but she was smiling. "You foolish man. Do you really not know?" "Know what?" "I am already in love with you. I think I fell the moment you offered me your horse and a way out. You gave me freedom, Russell, but more than that, you gave me hope. You made me believe that there were good men in the world, that I deserved kindness and respect." She lifted her hands to his face, feeling the scratch of stubble under her palms. "So yes, court me, visit me, write me letters, and know that my heart is already yours." Russell pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if she were something precious and breakable. Helena wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid warmth of him, the rightness of being held like this. "I will make you happy," Russell promised into her hair. "I swear I will spend my life making you happy." "You already have," Helena said. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. Helena melted into it, her first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed and nothing she could have imagined. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Russell rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably ask Mrs. Schmidt's permission to court you properly." Helena laughed. "Something tells me she already knows and approves." Indeed, when they went inside hand in hand, Mrs. Schmidt took one look at their faces and nodded with satisfaction. "Good. You are both sensible people. Now sit, eat, and Russell can tell us all the news from the Double R." The months that followed were the happiest of Helena's life. Russell visited as often as his work allowed, sometimes just for an afternoon, sometimes for a few days. They walked through Fredericksburg streets, attended church socials, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. Helena learned about his dreams of owning a ranch, his love of the land, his bone-deep decency that guided every action. Russell learned about her passion for teaching, her quick mind, her quiet strength, that steel beneath soft exterior. When he could not visit, he wrote letters. They arrived every week or two, smelling of leather and horse and prairie dust. Helena treasured each one, reading them over and over until the paper was soft with handling. She wrote back, long letters about her days at the boarding house, her growing friendships in town, her hopes for the future. And always, always, she wrote about how much she missed him, how she counted the days until his next visit. Mrs. Schmidt watched their courtship with approval, occasionally offering Helena advice drawn from her own long-ago marriage. "Love is good," she would say, "but respect is better. You have both. That is how you build a life that lasts." One evening, nearly 6 months after they had first arrived in Fredericksburg, Russell showed up unannounced. Helena was in the kitchen helping with dinner preparation when she heard Ranger's distinctive whinny. She dropped the potato she was peeling and ran outside, not caring that she was covered in vegetable peelings and flour. Russell caught her as she launched herself at him, laughing and spinning her around. "I missed you too," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I was not expecting you for another week," Helena said, too happy to care about the undignified display. "I have news," Russell said, and there was something in his voice that made Helena's heart race. "Big news. Come on, let us walk." They went to their usual spot in the garden, but this time Russell seemed almost nervous, a rare state for the usually calm cowboy. He took her hands, then seemed to think better of it and began pacing. "Just say it," Helena urged, anxiety creeping in. "Whatever it is, just tell me." Russell stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Mr. Richardson is selling the double R. His health is failing, and he wants to retire back east where his daughter lives. He offered to sell me a portion of the ranch, 200 acres with water rights and good grazing land, at a price I can actually afford." Helena's eyes widened. "Russell, that is wonderful. There is more. He is giving me generous terms, letting me pay it off over 5 years. I have been saving, and with what I can earn working the ranch, I can do it. I can actually own land, Helena. I can build a house, run cattle, create something that lasts." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I can build a future, but I do not want to build it alone." Helena's breath stopped. "What are you asking?" Russell pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small stone that caught the evening light. It was not fancy, but to Helena, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I am asking you to marry me," Russell said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards. I know you might want more time to be independent, to live your own life. But Helena, I love you more than I have ever loved anything. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build that ranch with you, fill it with children and laughter and all the things we both missed in our own families. I want to give you the life you deserve, full of choice and freedom and love." Tears were pouring down Helena's face again, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her. "Yes, Russell, yes, I will marry you." Russell's whoop of joy could probably be heard in town. He swept her up and spun her again, both of them laughing and crying at once. Then he slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. "I love you," Helena said, framing his face with her hands. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," Russell said softly. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." They kissed then, deep and passionate, sealing the promise. When they finally made their way back inside, Mrs. Schmidt took one look at Helena's glowing face and the ring on her finger and broke into rapid German, pulling Helena into a tight hug. "I knew," she said, switching back to English. "I knew from the first day you would marry that boy. He looks at you like you hung the moon." The wedding took place 2 months later in Fredericksburg's small church. It was a simple affair by necessity, but Helena would not have changed a thing. She wore a dress that some of the local women had helped her make, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery. Russell wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. Mrs. Schmidt gave Helena away, standing in as the family she had lost. Several of Russell's friends from the Double R came, along with many of the Fredericksburg residents who had become part of Helena's new community. It was small but filled with genuine love and support. When Russell said his vows, his voice was strong and clear. "I promise to honor you, to respect your choices, to be your partner in all things. I promise to build a home with you where love is the foundation. I promise to remember that you chose me freely, and to never take that gift for granted. Helena's own vows were simpler. I promise to love you, to stand beside you through good times and hard. I promise to be your safe harbor and your greatest adventure. I promise to build a life with you worth all the risks we took to find each other. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Russell kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. Then they walked out of the church as Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, ready to start their new life together. The ranch that would become their home was raw land when they first saw it. There was a small cabin that needed work, a barn that needed even more, and acres of untamed prairie. But to Helena, it was paradise. It was theirs, built on Russell's honest work and their combined dreams. They spent the first months working from dawn to dusk. Russell mended fences and worked the cattle while Helena transformed the cabin into a home. She planted a garden, sewed curtains, and made the small space warm and welcoming. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done at the boarding house, but it was work that mattered, building something permanent. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Russell had built, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Russell would hold her hand and tell her about his day, about the calf he had pulled from a muddy creek, or the section of fence he had repaired. Helena would share her own small triumphs, the first tomatoes ripening in her garden or the letter she had written to the school board about starting classes for ranch children in the area. "Are you happy?" Russell asked one evening about 6 months into their marriage. Helena looked at him, at this good man who had given her everything, and smiled. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. There are moments when I remember that night in San Pedro, when I climbed out my window not knowing if I would survive until morning. And then I look around at this life we have built, and I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real," Russell said, pulling her close, "and it is only going to get better." He was right. As the seasons turned and their first year on the ranch passed, things did get better. Russell proved to be a skilled rancher, and their small herd grew. Helena started teaching a handful of ranch children in their cabin one day a week, fulfilling her old dream in a new way. They made friends with neighboring ranchers, becoming part of the close-knit community that made up the Texas Hill Country. But the greatest joy came late in their second year of marriage when Helena discovered she was expecting a child. She told Russell one evening after dinner when he had just come in from working with the horses. She had been nervous about how to share the news, but in the end, she just blurted it out. "I am going to have a baby." Russell froze, a dish halfway to the wash basin. Then he turned slowly, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have been feeling sick in the mornings, and I am definitely late, and the doctor in town confirmed it." Helena bit her lip, suddenly worried by his reaction. "Is it too soon?" "I know we are still building the ranch and money is tight, and maybe this is not the best timing." Russell crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "It is perfect timing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Helena, we are going to have a baby. We are going to be a family." He dropped to his knees then and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. Helena ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by the moment. They were going to have a child, a person who would grow up surrounded by love and freedom and possibility. The contrast with her own childhood was stark and beautiful. "I am scared," Helena admitted. "What if I do not know how to be a good mother?" "You will be wonderful," Russell said, looking up at her. "You have more love in your little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. Our child is going to be so loved and so free, we will make sure of it." The pregnancy was not easy. Helena was sick for months, barely able to keep food down. The summer heat made everything worse, and there were days when she wondered if she would survive. But Russell was there through all of it, patient and caring, taking over her chores without complaint and sitting with her through the worst of it. As her belly swelled and the baby began to move, Helena's fear gave way to anticipation. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Russell built a cradle from oak, carving their initials and the baby's expected birth date into the wood. They argued playfully over names, making and discarding lists. "If it is a boy, I want to name him after my brother," Helena said one evening, her hands resting on her prominent belly. "What was his name?" Russell asked, looking up from the harness he was mending. "Daniel. He was only 2 years older than me, but he was my protector. He taught me to shoot and ride. He would have liked you." Helena's voice went soft with old grief. "He died of fever when he was 17. I still miss him." Russell set aside his work and came to sit beside her. "Daniel is a good name, strong, and if it is a girl, what was your mother's name?" "Eleanor, but everyone called her Ellie." "Eleanor Helena," Helena said, trying it out. "Or Daniel Russell. Either way, they will carry both our families with them." As it turned out, the baby decided to come early and in the middle of one of the worst storms of the season. Russell had to ride through sheeting rain to fetch the midwife, leaving Helena alone and terrified for nearly an hour. By the time they returned, Helena's labor was well advanced, and the pain was beyond anything she had imagined. The midwife, a practical German woman named Frau Richter, took charge immediately. She sent Russell to boil water and fetch linens, giving him tasks to keep him occupied while she tended to Helena. The labor was long and hard, stretching through the night and into the next day. Russell paced outside, going occasionally to check on her, but mostly staying clear as Frau Richter commanded. He could hear Helena's screams, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He prayed, something he had not done regularly since childhood, bargaining with God for her safety and the baby's. Finally, just as dawn was breaking and the storm was clearing, Russell heard a new sound. The thin, reedy cry of a newborn. He burst through the door without asking permission, his heart in his throat. Helena was propped up in bed, exhausted and pale, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Frau Richter looked up with approval. "A boy," she announced. "Small but healthy. He has good lungs." Russell approached the bed as if in a dream. Helena shifted the blankets so he could see the baby's face, red and wrinkled and perfect. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists waving in the air. "Daniel Russell Garrett," Helena whispered. "Our son." Russell sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. Daniel's fingers immediately closed around his father's finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Russell felt something shift in his chest, an expansion of love so intense it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Russell said, his voice breaking. "Helena, he is perfect, and you are amazing. I cannot believe you just did that." "I had some motivation," Helena said with a tired smile. "I wanted to meet him." Frau Richter bustled around, cleaning up and giving them instructions for the days ahead, but Russell barely heard her. He was lost in wonder at this tiny person they had created, this new life that was the culmination of their love story. The first weeks with Daniel were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Every cry sent Helena rushing to the cradle. Every breath was monitored anxiously. But gradually, they found their rhythm. Russell would bring the baby to Helena for night feedings, then walk him back to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. Helena would spend hours just watching Daniel sleep, marveling at his tiny features and trying to figure out who he looked like. As Daniel grew from newborn to infant, his personality began to emerge. He was a serious baby, watching the world with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. But when he smiled, it transformed his whole face, and both Helena and Russell would do absurd things to earn those precious grins. Life on the ranch adjusted to accommodate their new reality. Helena taught her ranch children with Daniel in a sling against her chest. Russell timed his work so he could be home for meals, unwilling to miss a moment of his son's development. They had less time for themselves, but the love between them only deepened, strengthened by the shared purpose of raising this child. One evening, when Daniel was about 6 months old and sitting up on his own, Helena looked at Russell across the dinner table and felt her heart swell with contentment. Their life was not fancy or easy. Money was always tight, the work was hard, and they faced challenges daily. But it was theirs, built on love and choice and freedom. "What are you thinking about?" Russell asked, catching her expression. "Just how far we have come," Helena said. 2 years ago, I was trapped in San Pedro, about to be sold to a man I despised. I thought my life was over before it really started. And now I have everything. A husband I love beyond measure, a son who is our greatest miracle, a home we built with our own hands, freedom to make my own choices and live my own life." Helena reached across the table to take Russell's hand. "You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Russell corrected. "You had the courage to take the chance. I just offered the horse. You offered so much more than that. You offered hope and safety and love. You offered a future I did not even know to dream about." Helena squeezed his hand. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every hard moment, every risk, every fear, because it led me to you." Russell stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you, Helena Garrett. I loved you that first night when you looked at me with those fierce eyes. I loved you when you trusted me enough to run. I love you more now than I thought was humanly possible, and I will love you until the day I die." They kissed, deep and sweet, while Daniel gurgled happily from his spot on the floor. It was not a perfect life, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect enough. The years continued to unfold with their share of joys and challenges. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Russell's hard work and smart management paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and improve their land. Helena's teaching grew from a handful of students to nearly a dozen, and she loved watching young minds develop and grow. Daniel thrived, growing from a serious infant into an energetic toddler with his mother's quick mind and his father's steady temperament. When he was 3, he became a big brother to twin girls, Grace and Hope, who arrived during a much easier labor that left Russell weak with relief. The twins were Helena's daughters through and through, with her honey-colored hair and fierce intelligence. The ranch house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Russell built additional rooms, and Helena filled them with love and laughter. Sunday dinners often included neighboring families, and their home became known for its warm welcome and Helena's excellent cooking. They faced hardships too. A drought one year that decimated their herd and required taking on debt. A bad fall that left Russell with a broken leg and unable to work for months. The normal childhood illnesses that terrified Helena every time, though all 3 children proved resilient. But they faced everything together, their partnership the bedrock on which their family was built. When Daniel was 10, Grace and Hope 8, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Helena was hanging laundry when she saw the well-dressed man on an expensive horse. Something about him made her uneasy, though she could not say why. Russell came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Can I help you?" "I am looking for Helena Katherine," the man said, and Helena's blood ran cold at the use of her maiden name. She had been Helena Garrett for so long that her old name sounded foreign. "Who is asking?" Russell said, his voice taking on a protective edge. "My name is Thomas Montgomery. I am Wallace Montgomery's son." Helena felt the world tilt. Wallace Montgomery, she had not thought of that name in years, had pushed those memories so far down that they rarely surfaced. Now they came rushing back, bringing fear and old anger with them. "My father died 3 years ago," Thomas continued, addressing Helena directly, though Russell had moved to stand partially in front of her. "Before he died, he asked me to find you. He wanted me to deliver a message." "I do not want anything from him," Helena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Please, just hear me out." Thomas dismounted, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. "My father was not a good man. I know that. I spent my childhood watching him destroy my mother with his cruelty. She died when I was 12, broken and used up." Russell tensed, but Thomas continued. "After she died, my father married twice more. Both women left him, chose poverty and scandal over staying in his house. I do not blame them. When I was old enough, I left too. I have not spoken to him in 5 years before he summoned me to his deathbed." "Why are you here?" Helena asked. "Because his last words were about you. About the girl who got away, the only woman who ever stood up to him. He said to tell you he was sorry, that you were right to run." Thomas pulled an envelope from his jacket. "He also left you this. It is a bank draft for the amount he paid your father for you. He said it was blood money and you deserved to have it back." Helena stared at the envelope as if it might bite. "I do not want his money. It is not his anymore. He is dead, but it is rightfully yours, compensation for what he tried to do to you." Thomas held out the envelope. "Take it or throw it away, I do not care, but I delivered his message. His last act was acknowledging that what he did was wrong. Maybe that means something, maybe it does not. But now you know." Russell took the envelope, not opening it but tucking it into his pocket. "Thank you for coming all this way. I hope you found some peace from your father." Thomas nodded, remounting his horse. "I hope the same for both of you. From the look of this place and your family, I would say Helena made the right choice that night." He tipped his hat to Helena. "Goodbye, Mrs. Garrett. I hope you have a good life." They watched him ride away, and only when he was out of sight did Helena allow herself to lean into Russell's strength. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am now. It was just a shock, hearing that name again, being reminded of that night." Helena pulled back to look up at him. "But he is dead. He cannot hurt anyone anymore, and I have this life, this beautiful life with you and our children. He lost, Russell. We won." Russell opened the envelope and they both stared at the bank draft. It was for a substantial amount, enough to pay off their remaining debt on the ranch and still have money left over. Helena thought about refusing it, about the principle of not taking anything from Wallace Montgomery even in death. But then she thought about what they could do with this money. The security it would bring their children, the freedom from worry. "We will take it," she decided. "But we will use it to build something good. We will invest it in the ranch and our children's futures. We will turn his blood money into something pure." "That sounds perfect," Russell agreed. That night, after the children were asleep and they were alone in their room, Helena told Russell the whole story of that night. She had shared pieces over the years, but never the complete picture. She told him about her father's drunken celebration, about the fear that had consumed her, about climbing out the window with no plan beyond escape. "When I saw you in that stable, I thought you might be there to stop me," Helena said, curled against Russell's side. "But then you offered to help, and it was like the universe giving me a gift I did not even know to ask for." "I almost did not go that night," Russell admitted. "I talked myself out of it twice, but something kept pulling me back, this feeling that I needed to be there. I am glad I listened." "So am I." You saved my life, Russell, in every way that matters. And you saved mine right back. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and saving and existing but not really living. You taught me how to love, how to dream, how to build something that matters. They made love that night with the tenderness that came from years of partnership, of knowing each other's bodies and hearts completely. And afterward, lying in the darkness with Russell's heartbeat steady under her ear, Helena felt the last shadows of her old life finally dissolve. She was free in every way that mattered, free to love and be loved, free to raise her children in safety and joy, free to build a future limited only by their shared dreams. The ranch continued to prosper, aided by the injection of capital from Montgomery's final payment. They expanded their holdings, bought better breeding stock, and built a larger house as their family continued to grow. Helena gave birth to 2 more children over the years, another boy they named Matthew, and a daughter they called Rose. Their home was filled with noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Daniel grew into a responsible young man who loved ranching as much as his father. Grace and Hope developed into strong-willed girls who kept everyone on their toes. Matthew was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book. And little Rose was the baby who everyone spoiled. Helena's teaching expanded into a proper school, built on a corner of their property with help from neighboring families. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history to a generation of ranch children who might otherwise have grown up without education. It was deeply satisfying work, and Russell would sometimes sit in on lessons, learning alongside the children and joking that his wife was making him smarter in his old age. As the years passed and their children grew toward adulthood, Helena and Russell would sometimes sit on their porch in the evening, watching the sunset and reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not climbed out that window?" Russell asked one evening when they were both in their 40s, silver threading through their hair but their love as strong as ever. "Sometimes," Helena admitted. "But then, I remember that I would have found a way out eventually. I was never going to let Montgomery cage me. It might have been harder, might have taken longer, but I would have escaped somehow." "But would we have found each other?" Helena turned to look at him, at this man who had been her partner through 2 decades of marriage, who had given her 5 beautiful children and a life beyond her wildest dreams. "I like to think so. I like to think that souls that are meant to find each other will, one way or another. But I am grateful we found each other when we did, that you were there that night with Ranger and your kind heart and your willingness to help a stranger." "Best decision I ever made," Russell said, pulling her close. "Offering you that horse and saying ride with me. Best decision I ever made was taking you up on it." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Around them, their ranch bustled with life. Cattle lowed in the distance. Chickens scratched in the yard. Inside, they could hear their children laughing over dinner preparations. It was a symphony of home and family and hard-won happiness. Their children grew and eventually left the ranch to build their own lives. Daniel took over the majority of the ranch operations, building a house on the far edge of the property when he married a schoolteacher from Fredericksburg. Grace became a nurse, drawn to healing after watching her mother tend to countless injuries and illnesses over the years. Hope surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, fighting for women's rights in San Antonio. Matthew did indeed follow his literary dreams, becoming a journalist for a Dallas newspaper. And Rose, their baby, became a teacher like her mother, taking over Helena's school when Helena finally decided to retire. Through it all, Helena and Russell remained the center of their sprawling family. Their house was always full of children and grandchildren, of celebrations and quiet moments and the kind of love that becomes the foundation of a family legacy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together what seemed like half the hill country. Friends, neighbors, former students, and business associates all came to celebrate the love story that had become local legend. The tale of the runaway bride and the cowboy who saved her had been told and retold so many times that it had taken on an almost mythical quality. But Helena and Russell knew the truth was both simpler and more profound than any legend. They had found each other in a moment of desperate need and chosen to build something beautiful together. Through hard work, mutual respect, and abiding love, they had created not just a marriage but a legacy that would echo through generations. Helena stood before their gathered loved ones, Russell's hand warm in hers, and felt tears of joy and gratitude streaming down her face. 30 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd, I was running for my life. I had no plan, no resources, and very little hope. Then a cowboy with a good heart offered me his horse and said, "Ride with me." Those 3 simple words changed everything. They gave me freedom, they gave me love, and they gave me the most beautiful life I could have imagined. She turned to Russell, seeing the man she loved reflected in his eyes, still there after all these years. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me the chance to become who I was always meant to be." Russell pulled her close, unmindful of their audience. "Thank you for being brave enough to take that chance. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for 30 years of love and laughter and everything good." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "And thank you for saying yes when I asked you to keep riding with me for the rest of our lives." The party continued around them, but for a moment, it was just the two of them. Just Helena and Russell, still in love after 3 decades, still grateful for that night in San Pedro, when a desperate girl and a kind cowboy found each other in the darkness. As the years continued to roll past, they grew old together with grace and contentment. Russell's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they were still gentle when they held Helena's. Helena's hair turned completely silver, but her eyes still sparkled with intelligence and humor. They moved slower, tired more easily, but their love never diminished. They passed their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. Their children and grandchildren came and went, filling their home with life and joy. The ranch that had been built on hope and hard work thrived under Daniel's management. Helena's school produced graduates who went on to become teachers, doctors, lawyers, and ranchers themselves, spreading the gift of education she had given them. On a warm spring evening in their 50th year of marriage, Helena and Russell sat on their porch watching another sunset. They had watched thousands together, but each one still felt special, a gift to be treasured. Russell held Helena's hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "I never told you this," Russell said quietly, "but that night in San Pedro when I decided to ride out to your father's ranch, I was planning to leave Texas. I had been offered a job working cattle in Montana, better pay and a chance for advancement. I was going to take it." Helena looked at him in surprise. "I never knew that. If I had not gone to your father's place that night, I would have left the next day. We would never have met." Russell's voice was thoughtful. "Sometimes I think about that, about how close I came to missing you entirely. It terrifies me. But you did not miss me. You came and you saved me and we built this life together." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "That is what matters, not what might have been, but what is." "What is?" Russell repeated, looking out at the ranch that had grown from raw land and desperate dreams into something permanent and beautiful. "I like what is very much." "So do I," Helena whispered. "So do I." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, filling the sky with light. Inside, they could hear Rose talking to her own children, their great-grandchildren, telling them stories of their great-grandmother who had been brave enough to run and their great-grandfather who had been kind enough to help. The stories would continue long after Helena and Russell were gone, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with 3 simple words and the courage to take a chance. Helena and Russell lived well into their 80s, both of them remaining sharp and engaged until the end. When Russell finally passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Helena grieved but did not break. She knew he would always be with her, in the ranch they had built, in the children they had raised, in every sunset and every moment of beauty she experienced. She lived another 3 years after Russell's death, spending her days surrounded by family and filled with memories of a life well lived. She told stories about Russell to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. She walked the ranch land every day, weather permitting, remembering the years of work and love that had gone into every fence post and pasture. On a quiet evening in early summer, sitting on the porch with her oldest daughter Grace beside her, Helena felt the pull of something beyond this world. The sunset that evening was particularly beautiful, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that reminded her of that first night, racing through the darkness with Russell's arms around her and freedom beckoning ahead. "Tell me about the night you met Papa," Grace asked, sensing something in her mother's mood. Helena smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "I was fleeing an arranged marriage. I thought my life was over before it really started. Then a cowboy offered his horse and said, 'Ride with me.'" She paused, seeing it all again in her mind's eye. "And I did. I rode with him through that night and for 53 years after, best ride of my life." Grace held her mother's hand as Helena slipped away peacefully, a smile on her face, leaving behind a legacy of love and courage that would echo through generations of Garretts. She had lived a life of freedom and choice, had loved and been loved beyond measure, had raised children who would carry her values forward into the future. The ranch remained in the family, passed down from Daniel to his children and beyond. The school Helena had founded continued to educate ranch children, and the story of Helena and Russell became the foundation story of their family, told and retold, inspiring each new generation to be brave, to be kind, and to never give up on love. In the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side. Helena Katherine Garrett and Russell Matthew Garrett. The dates marked long lives well lived, but the inscription told the real story, chosen by their children to honor the truth of their parents' love. She was fleeing. He offered hope. Together they rode into forever. And as the years passed and the seasons turned, their story remained alive in the land they had loved, in the family they had built, and in the hearts of everyone who heard the tale of a brave girl and a kind cowboy who found each other in the darkness and chose to ride together into the light.